I don't think it has ever been as important as it is today to champion the great impact that universities have on our society. Universities have a profoundly positive impact on the world through their educational programs, of course, through their work in the community, through their inventions, their innovations, and through their groundbreaking discoveries. Universities drive regional and national economies. More profoundly, they help us to understand what it is to be human. They make the world a better place. This extraordinary, rich, deep, diverse impact is demonstrated so clearly, so powerfully by the current global health and economic crisis. From the international teams of biomedical scientists developing tests, treatments, and vaccines, to the social scientists helping us to understand and mitigate the profound socioeconomic fallout of the crisis, to the arts and humanities scholars bringing vital, critical thinking and communication skills to help us all navigate the crisis. But despite this unquestionable and to me absolutely obvious public good, universities in many parts of the world seem to be under attack. Across the continents, populist politicians are questioning the very worth of our higher education institutions. And perversely, the pandemic has promoted and empowered the forces seeking to denigrate universities. It has further fueled the nationalism, the protectionism, and indeed the xenophobia that challenges the core values of an open global university sector where ideas know no borders. It has fired up those who promote conspiracy theories and fake news and who seek to dismiss expertise, evidence, and the pursuit of truth. Universities need a concerted defense. So what's my organization, Times Higher Education, trying to do to help? We specialize in data and analysis. And of course, we produce a rather influential set of university rankings. So our approach has been largely data-driven. We've harnessed that unique and admittedly controversial power that university rankings have to attract widespread attention and to focus the minds of university leaders and politicians. We've been publishing the World University Rankings to an audience of many tens of millions since 2004. But in 2019, we changed the game. We took a fresh look at what excellence in global higher education and research looks like. We published the first edition of the THE Impact Rankings, based not on prestige and wealth, but on the role of universities in making the world a better place. The framework we chose for the THE Impact Rankings were the Sustainable Development Goals. We wanted to capture that extraordinarily rich and broad impact on the world, to demonstrate it at a sector level for the first time, and indeed to celebrate and champion it. We wanted to provide clear and highly visible examples of best practice across all 17 individual SDGs, to provide benchmarks, to incentivize others, and to facilitate new partnerships and collaborations. And with carrots, perhaps there are some sticks. While we can use the data to promote and celebrate excellence in supporting the SDGs, we also hope that the power of rankings, the vast public attention they attract, will also prompt hesitant universities to step forward and to open themselves up to accountability. Indeed, we hope that in time that students and other stakeholders will demand that. So as we move into year 3 of this great project, we now have an extraordinarily deep and rich and rapidly growing data set on universities' contribution to every single one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, covering their research, their teaching, their stewardship of their own resources, and their outreach to other partners in the community. More than 800 universities across the world have joined the movement so far, and it's a glorious array of diverse institutions. Times Higher Education is proud to have developed a new, accessible, and powerful way to show the world how universities contribute towards fighting disease, reducing poverty, how they promote economic growth and decent work, good health, clean and affordable energy, sustainable cities, quality education, and much, much more. We can and we will use the data and the stories it uncovers to champion this vital work, to make the case for long-term sustained investment in the world's universities as they make their long-term sustained and profound contribution to making the world a better place. Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Duncan Ivison. I'm Deputy Vice-Chancellor Research here at the University of Sydney in Australia. And I just wanted to make three general comments about the SDGs and the University of Sydney's experience with them. I think the first thing I'd say is one reason why the SDGs are such a powerful framework for thinking about the contribution our research and education makes is because I really think that universities like ours, we're a comprehensive research-intensive university, I think increasingly the community expects us to harness our research in ways that address the really complex, difficult issues that our local community faces, that our country faces, and that our region and the world faces. I think that's a really deep, fundamental shift that's occurring, not only in Australia, but across the world. We just know that whether it's climate change, whether it's global poverty and social dislocation and alienation, whether it's the rise of an impact of technology, of course, things like the global pandemic, we just know that governments, firms, and indeed universities can't address those problems on their own. And because of the deep polarization that's occurring in so many countries today politically, I think our communities look to universities to provide that long-term thinking, to be willing to say, hey, this is complex. We need to work together and we need to accept the complexity of the issues we're dealing with. So I think that expectation is a really powerful force and an opportunity for universities. And the SDGs provide, I think, a really, important framework for thinking about how our research can contribute to those really significant issues. And if I think about where we are in the Asia Pacific, the impact of climate change, the importance of discovering new ways of managing our resources, our energy, our water, soil. These are issues that we all face, and there are particular challenges here. So I think, broadly speaking, the SDGs provide a really important framework for thinking that through. I think the second, and it's something that we've really embraced as a university over the last, especially the last year or two, and I'm really, I think, passionate about seeing the SDGs as a way of thinking about our research more broadly as we think about our next strategy over the course of 2021. I think the other issue, or the other reason why SDGs are I think, of increasing importance for us is they're incredibly motivating for our students, for our staff, and for our alumni. And as I said, I think there's this broader desire on the part of the community that universities address the really significant issues our world faces. And I think that's profound. But I think it's really motivating for our researchers. It's really motivating for our students to want to engage and think about how our teaching and how our research contributes to achieving the SDGs. And, it's not easy. It's not something that one can say happens overnight. But I think it's very motivating for our people. It's something that really gets them excited. That's something I've discovered in the discussions I'm having with colleagues all over and across our many campuses. I mean, one way we're trying to capture that is, on the one hand, we're trying to think about this high level contribution that we make to the SDG goals through our research and teaching. But on another level, we're thinking about what we can do on our campus every day in terms of the way we work and teach and research. And we're thinking of, we think of that as the university as a living lab for sustainability, as a living lab for addressing social, economic, and cultural challenges in our local community. So how do we actually align our daily life as an institution with the spirit, aspiration, and framework of the SDGs, along with how do we kind of align our research and education at a high level? And I think this has been a really, exciting and very engaging way to get the community talking about these issues. And we've launched a new sustainability strategy that brings this living lab campus as a living lab concept together with our aspirational research and education ambitions together in that strategy. And the SDGs feature very prominently as a way of thinking through those issues. And then finally, I guess the third thing I'd say is challenges. Obviously, the big challenge is how do we make our contribution to the SDGs real? These are very high level, fairly abstract, aspirational targets. We know in many cases they're going backwards, right? We're actually falling behind our ability to achieve those targets. So how do we make them real? And that's a genuine challenge. You can have all the KPIs and all the fancy races and spreadsheets you want, but how do you make them real? The living lab concept is one way we're thinking about that, but I think there's a broader issue, both for universities, but also for governments and for industry. And it's been interesting talking to some of our industry partners about how they're thinking that through, and our government partners as well. We have state and Commonwealth departments who are thinking about the SDGs as well. So making the SDGs real. I mean, you know, rankings are one way to go, and of course we're pleased to be held to account, as it were, by various kinds of rankings that measure impact, such as the THE, obviously, but that's only part of the solution. And of course, rankings have a way, I think, of sometimes of becoming an end in themselves, and that's not, I think, what we want to see here. So those are some initial comments, remarks on why the SDGs are important and how at Sydney we're trying to think through the consequences of embracing the SDGs as a way of thinking about our research and education. Thanks.
Without doubt, universities have a key role to play in supporting the implementation and monitoring of the SDGs. However, this role comes with great responsibility to adopt an ethical and political stand that challenges the reproduction of a Western-focused perspective. So perhaps the question we need to examine is instead, how can universities meaningfully contribute to the SDG process without unintendedly contributing to further injustices? In examining this question, I would like to put forward three considerations. First, to work beyond the boundaries requires decolonizing the boundaries themselves. That is, the aspirational boundaries that the SDGs defined as desirable global change. In this regard, the first thing to notice is that underpinning all the 17 SDGs is the intention to tackle different forms of injustice and inequality at play. Yet, environmental and social justice are not currently embedded within the language and spirit of the SDGs. The pursuit of justice goes clearly beyond Goal 16. It requires a critical exploration of the SDG synergies and contradictions and their potential to lead both to justice and injustice. The second thing to observe here is that the locus of much of the SDGs implementation entails intended positive outcomes in the so-called Global South. Therefore, we need to keep an eye on the question of how to support a Southern perspective into the process, even when we do so from institutions located elsewhere. That brings me to a second point, and that is the need to decolonize development and its knowledge base. That is the way we think about development, the actions taken in its pursuit, and the indicators we use to monitor progress. For instance, if we look at the SDG 8, the focus is on promoting economic growth without reference to the need and possibilities for other forms of economic development and well-being, including, for instance, the importance of thinking about sustainable degrowth and material decoupling. One way of thinking about decolonizing development and the SDGs may involve exploring alternatives to dominant understandings of development. This includes developing alternatives to the structures governing public life, both in the global North and South, shifting away from following either an hegemonic market-driven paradigm or the common model of the North to South development interventions. This takes us to consider questions, if you wish, of development, what type of development, how, by whom, and for whom. My third and last point is that universities can play a crucial role in answering these questions, but also in the making and unmaking of boundaries. The the assumptions, theories, knowledge, data, and pedagogies we use and produce can either solidify or subvert exclusionary processes. Decolonizing development, the SDGs, and the university means questioning and unpacking how is that colonial, neoliberal, and patriarchal hegemonic structures of power continue to produce contemporary inequalities, and also working out how these highly unequal structures can be addressed. This inevitably takes us to the need to adopt a critical self-reflection. The crisis that American and European universities suffer today is not only the result of pressures created by the financial crisis, global capitalism, and more recently, COVID-19. This crisis originates in the exhaustion of the Enlightenment academic model and its claim of superiority in tackling global questions. We still live in an era of neoliberal university reforms where a decolonial critique of dominant forms and institutions of knowledge is still a marginal pursuit. And this is something really important to remember. Therefore, making universities fit for purpose calls for a number of dramatic institutional reforms and also changes in our practices. The role of university in propelling the SDGs is not about providing abstract global solutions. We need to cultivate spaces of and for epistemic justice. In our case, this implies imagining and co-creating a southern epistemological space within an order setting. I very much look forward to a rich and productive debate at the conference.
Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be part of this panel. Very much looking forward to the debate during the session. In this short input, I'm going to make three main points. First is to acknowledge the extraordinary contribution that universities are currently making to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, but also to highlight two ways in which I think we need to go beyond what's currently being done. The first of those relates to the institutions that are involved and where they're located around the world. And secondly, around the framework itself. So firstly, extraordinary work that's currently being done in universities, cutting-edge research contributing to solving the world's most intractable problems, increasing incorporation of sustainability issues, climate change and so forth into taught courses and providing a rich learning environment for students. Ever stronger links with communities, engaging with the public over these key issues. And also changes to campuses and making universities more efficient and environmentally friendly. But to a large extent, these initiatives are located in certain kinds of universities in certain kinds of countries, mainly high-income countries and well-resourced institutions. Now, that's not to say that universities in poorer contexts are not making key contributions. In many ways, they are having an absolutely transformatory role in their communities and countries in which they're located. But we have to acknowledge that the world is going through an extraordinary expansion of higher education. And many of the institutions that are involved in absorbing the new demand do not correspond to the kinds of institutions that are scoring highly on, for example, the Times Higher Impact ranking. International rankings tend to have something in the region of 1,000 institutions listed or so forth. It's a small proportion of the total number of institutions in the world. More than a third of young people nowadays go on to some kind of post-secondary education. So it's becoming a mass system. And we need to think about incorporating all of those higher education systems into this task of achieving the SDGs. Too often there is a drive for expansion at any cost, or rather with any form of quality, any form of institution, through expanding for-profit sectors and poor quality distance education that can't achieve the kind of learning quality and also public benefit that are needed. So we need to think about an expansion of higher education with quality and with the kind of contribution to society that's needed, and particularly bearing in mind that all countries need a high quality higher education sector. It's tempting perhaps for some to think that star global north institutions can solve the problems for the whole world. They can certainly make a contribution, but we're not going to achieve the goals that we're after unless every context has a high quality higher education system addressing local problems and also providing a rich learning environment for their students. The final point then relates to the framework of the SDGs. Now it's the best we've got. It's a very significant improvement on what we've had before, and we should wholeheartedly aim for achieving the goals that are there. But it's not a perfect system. The SDGs are based on an unfounded optimism that the current economic model can help us achieve a just and sustainable world. So we need to question that model. The SDGs also are inattentive to questions of culture, language, knowledge traditions, and those also need to be incorporated into our vision. So I would argue that the university also needs to be at the forefront of helping us reimagine that framework. We need to think about universities as protagonists, not just in adapting to what's outside, but also taking the lead. And what better institution to reimagine, to critique, and to recast the ideas about what the Global Development Compact should be. But we also need to think about the structures of the university itself, to be imaginative about what kind of institution can solve these problems. Innovation, including technology, but not limited to technology. New forms of institution that can flower. And finally, the knowledge element. We need to think about epistemic pluralism, about incorporating different kinds of knowledge traditions into the university, including processes of decolonization, but they're processes, in fact, that are relevant for all contexts, all kinds of institutions, in providing a rich learning environment and research environment that goes beyond attention to indigenous knowledge around medicinal plants, for example, to think more deeply about different ways in which knowledge is gained and shared. So those are some points to contribute to the debate, and I very much look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Hi there, my name is Tanya and I'm a recent UCL graduate. I graduated this summer in the midst of the pandemic with a BA in English Literature and French. Now, I think when talking about the SDGs and sustainability more widely, it's really important to first of all consider what the role of universities is in meeting student demands and what students should actually expect from their university experience at a higher education institution such as UCL. Personally, I think that one great example of the growing role of universities is the creation of the U7 Alliance, which is an international alliance of university presidents engaging in discussions and taking concrete actions to address current global challenges. Now, Principle 3 of the U7 Alliance's commitments reads that universities have a major role to play in addressing the environmental issues and challenges to sustainability through the development of specified courses, but also by improving the sustainability of campuses. As such, I think that UCL has the responsibility to respond to student demands, but more fundamentally, as an authoritative actor in the fields of teaching and research, I think UCL must advance efforts for the SDGs and have an active voice in both national and global sustainability debates. Now, when it comes to the implementation of the SDGs, I think it's really, really important to look at both the formal curriculum, but also what takes place outside of it. Yes, of course, we must revise existing curricula, integrating the SDGs into a wider range of courses. However, there is definitely a limit of what academics can do to drive forward our learning in the classroom when it comes to sustainability. Of course, they do control what happens directly in the classroom, but I think it's equally as important to think of the informal curriculum, what happens outside of the classroom, students' real-life experiences. And I think now it's becoming more evident than ever that students and student leaders are calling for more practical, targeted initiatives and projects on campus. Therefore, I think we must raise awareness of the SDGs all across campus, ensuring that the narrative is being adapted and sustainable solutions are being integrated at all levels by students themselves, by academics, by administrative staff, going all the way up to the highest level of decision-making at UCL. Now, of course, there are already many fantastic past and present initiatives led by students on our campus. I think that students do play a major and critical role in pushing UCL's agenda with regards to sustainability. And we mustn't forget that they can be really effective agents of change, and student activism can work and can pressure governments to support the meaningful inclusion of students in their decision making. We need to enhance student participation, and I think that having sustainability ambassadors and a student sustainability council are already two really great steps in the right direction when it comes to UCL. Other examples of past and present student-led initiatives include the Fuel Divestment Campaign, which was a really great extracurricular example, really persuasive, and did a lot of really great work. There's also things such as Architecture Declares at the Bartlett School of Architecture, and other fantastic initiatives going on. So it's obvious that universities provide a really great setting for this type of activism. However, there still remains the question of how are these types of projects currently being recognized? Are they being recognized at all? Should there be more recognition? And does our current education system, as it stands now, really value such extracurricular contributions? So I think those are all really important things to think about. We also mustn't forget the impact of the pandemic when it comes to sustainability and the SDGs. I think that the pandemic has highlighted more than ever before the importance of maintaining a dynamic of exchanges in these unprecedented times, even when we're all scattered across the world. And paradoxically, I think the pandemic has actually opened up some new channels of communication, which has been really nice to see, but also obviously brought certain new challenges with it. I think universities will have a really key role to play in contributing to the aftermath of the current coronavirus crisis by advancing sustainable solutions and aiming to reinforce our resilience to such crisis in the future. I think the COVID-19 pandemic really urges universities such as UCL to leverage their experience and their expertise and to develop new action plans of reaching their goals and new ways of teaching. So finally, just to summarize, how can UCL go further when it comes to the SDGs? I think the inclusion from undergraduate level onwards of a largely interdisciplinary approach to sustainable development issues should become and must become a priority. I think it's also really imperative that we adapt and support professional careers in sustainable development. And as a recent graduate, I think this is something which is severely lacking at the moment. I think it's also really important to see what other institutions are doing, both across the country and across the world, and how they're responding to these challenges. I think, once again, communication is key, and an exchange of ideas would really help us all to push forward our initiatives and our agendas. I think there'd be something really valuable in a massive university such as UCL offering up a really principled response to the SDGs. I think from a student's point of view, they can be quite overwhelming to think about because they offer, or they encourage such breadth of conversation, being themselves emblematic of huge challenges facing a modern society. And I think it's UCL's responsibility to not only foster that conversation and to challenge its students to think outside of the box when it comes to sustainability, but also to create a university setting which encourages this dynamic interrelationship between students, staff, and academics all working together to respond to the challenges that we're faced with and to make our campus more sustainable year after year.
I'm Aromar, the director of the Indian Institute for Human Settlements, IIHS, in Bangalore, and also the co-chair of the Sustainable Solutions Development Network, SDSN, which has helped frame and implements the SDGs across the world. Since 2013, I've been actively involved in framing, negotiating, institutionalizing, and trying to assist in the implementation of the SDGs in India and in multiple other places across the world, especially focusing on urban areas and local and regional governments. What a number of people don't know is that universities and academics have been pivotally involved in not only framing, but negotiating, defining the institutional processes and the implementation paradigms for the SDGs in many parts of the world. SDSN, which is a network of over 1,200 universities across the world, national and regional networks, has served two of the UN Secretary Generals, Ban Ki-moon and Antonio Guterres, in trying to help frame, negotiate, and define how the SDGs can be brought to implementation. We've also been actively involved in SDG education. The SDG Academy, for example, has produced an entire framework for SDG education across all 17 SDGs that is being currently viewed by, I think, close to 500,000 learners across the world, along with 2 master's programs that have just been launched out of Malaysia and out of Ireland to focus on SDG education. IIHS was centrally involved in framing and negotiating SDG 11. In fact, the three major convenings that we had of academics, researchers, urban networks, and urban leaders started with a convening in London, which a number of colleagues from UCL joined, moved on to Gothenburg, and finally closed at IIHS in Bangalore in 2015, which effectively defined what you see today as SDG 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities. To give you a sense of how this works at national level, IIHS, as a national education and innovation institution working in India, has been pivotally involved in not only tracking the SDGs, we produce the annual Urban SDG report for the country, but also implementing a whole range of initiatives around, for example, SDG 6, water and sanitation. IIHS's research program has a strong emphasis on the SDGs. We're actually working with colleagues and institutions across the world to address questions of SDG implementation and framing. Our research program with UCL, the No Project, which is anchored by DPU, focuses on urban inequality, which is in a sense bringing together SDGs 11, 8, 5 and 10 to try and address both existing and prospective challenges that are involved with urban inequality. We're doing similar things with University of Oxford in a big GCRF program called Peak Urban, which looks at new urban science and its sort of convergence with the new urban agenda, with climate action, and effectively looking at the operationalization of the urban SDGs in 4 different locations across the world. The IIHS campus that we are planning and building in Bangalore is a wonderful example of how we can actually try and operationalize as an academic institution the ideas that are embedded in the SDGs. It is energy positive, carbon positive, net zero energy, net zero waste site in which we teach and we research, and we will hopefully live and work for a long period of time. So effectively, universities have already been and will be increasingly part of not only the implementation of the SDGs on their campuses. I would say that's a relatively easy thing to do, but actually working with the cities and communities in which they're embedded, in the regions and the countries in which they're actually working, to not only influence what's happening in practice just now, but to educate, train and influence a new generation of researchers, of academics, of learners, and activists and practitioners who will make the SDGs possible in the sort of 10 years that we have to make that happen.